Nathan Ellis walked into his anniversary dinner, confident and in control, unaware that his entire world was about to collapse. His mistress had planned a dramatic entrance, but his wife had planned something far worse by dessert. She would raise her glass to her freedom, and he would realize he had lost everything. The city glowed under the soft wash of Manhattan streetlights as Nathan Ellis adjusted the cuffs of his custom charcoal suit. His reflection in the tinted window of the town car was exactly as he liked it. Composed, powerful, untouchable. He exhaled slowly before stepping onto the sidewalk where a valet hurried over. The young man barely dared to meet Nathan's eyes as he handed over the keys, murmuring a deferential, "Have a wonderful evening, Mr. Ellis." Nathan barely nodded, already turning to offer his hand to his wife, Vivian Ellis, as she stepped out. With the practiced grace of someone born for this world, her sapphire blue gown draped elegantly along her slender frame, her auburn hair pinned into a sleek twist that showed off the graceful line of her neck, a picture of poised elegance. Yet something about her silence tonight felt off. Too calm, too deliberate. Nathan slipped an arm around her waist as they entered Mirabelle, one of the most exclusive restaurants on the Upper East Side. Inside, the familiar notes of vintage wine and delicate truffle oil wrapped around them. He had chosen this place carefully. The dim, flattering lights, the quiet hum of muted conversation, the faultless service, everything crafted to conjure an air of closeness. It was their 10th anniversary after all. The evening had to be flawless. A maitre d' appeared at once, all practiced warmth and polished courtesy. "Mr. and Mrs. Ellis, your table is waiting." Vivian gave a polite nod but remained silent. Nathan guided her through the dining room, past diners who cast fleeting glances their way, some curious, some envious. It was always like this. They were a spectacle, a couple whispered about but never disturbed. Once they settled into the plush privacy of their corner booth, Nathan tugged his tie looser and picked up the wine list. "Something special tonight," he murmured, scanning the selection. "How about the 2002 Bordeaux? Been saving it for the right moment." Vivian didn't answer right away. She traced the rim of her glass with her fingertip, the faint tap of her manicured nail barely audible above the low clink of cutlery. "Sure," she said at last, her voice calm, unreadable. Nathan watched her for a beat, then signaled the sommelier. The bottle was presented with quiet fanfare. Uncorked and poured into delicate glasses, the deep crimson swirl shimmered, steeped in history. Nathan lifted his glass, offering his wife a practiced, easy smile. "To us," he said. Vivian clinked her glass lightly against his, but didn't drink right away. She watched him over the rim, her eyes calm, impossible to read. Nathan took a sip, savoring the warmth, the bold tannins rolling across his tongue. He set his glass back down, resting his forearms against the white linen tablecloth. "You're quiet tonight," he remarked, tilting his head just slightly. Vivian finally tasted her wine, then lowered the glass with deliberate care. "Am I?" Nathan chuckled, shaking his head. "You are. I thought I'd see a bit more excitement tonight. 10 years, after all." She held his gaze for a breath before offering a small, cryptic smile. "I suppose I'm just thinking about everything." Another pause, another unhurried sip of wine. "You know, 10 years. Everything we've built." Her fingertip traced the slender stem of the glass, her tone light. "Everything we've hidden." A prickle danced at the base of Nathan's neck. He forced himself not to shift in his seat, but deep down a tiny spark of unease crackled under his practiced calm. He hated that, hated feeling like he was the one being studied for once. A flicker of tension tugged at Nathan's chest, but he forced a short laugh, waving a hand. "Darling, you've always had a flair for the dramatic." Vivian's lips curved, but it wasn't amusement. "Do I?" The question sounded so simple, yet the chill beneath it scraped at his composure. He found his fingers twitching against the tablecloth, the faintest betrayal of nerves he wouldn't dare show her. For the first time that night, Nathan felt a faint slip in his usual footing. It was subtle, but the way she looked at him now, measured, intentional, made his skin tighten beneath his suit jacket. He was used to steering every room, every mood, but her perfect, unsettling calm was shifting that balance. Their appetizers arrived, a precise arrangement of seared scallops resting on a bed of saffron risotto. The dish looked impeccable, but Nathan found he had no appetite. Vivian lifted her fork and sliced through a scallop with graceful precision. Do you remember our first anniversary? Nathan blinked, momentarily thrown by the change in topic. He recovered quickly, pasting on a fond smile. Of course. Paris. That hotel balcony, way too much champagne. Vivian nodded slowly. It was a good night. She lifted a bite to her lips, chewing thoughtfully. Back then, everything felt real. That word, real, dug at him more than he'd admit. He forced his jaw to stay relaxed. It shouldn't sting, but it did. Nathan's fingers curled against the edge of the table. And it doesn't now. Vivian met his eyes, her expression soft, impossible to read. What do you think? He exhaled hard through his nose, shifting his shoulders back. I think you're in a strange mood tonight. She hummed under her breath, almost as if weighing his words. Maybe I am. Nathan leaned closer, lowering his voice just for her. Is something bothering you? Vivian tilted her head, studying him for a moment that seemed to stretch longer than it should. Would it matter if it was? Nathan did not like this turn. He could feel it, the control slipping. He never let that happen. He reached for her hand across the table, giving it a gentle squeeze. Viv, whatever it is, we can talk about it. She let him hold her hand for a heartbeat, before slipping free and reaching instead for her wine glass. The sommelier returned, unobtrusive, refilling their glasses without a word. The moment stretched on, taut and stifling, and Nathan forced himself to breathe normally. This was nothing, just a mood. Vivian was always perceptive, always sharp, but she didn't know anything. He had covered every trail. He always did. A server arrived with their entrees, cutting through the tension. Medium rare filet mignon, plated to perfection. Nathan lifted his knife, slicing through the tender meat with practiced ease. Let's enjoy our night, he said, his tone smooth, easy, commanding the moment back. No more riddles, Vivian took a slow sip of wine and set the glass down with delicate precision. She lifted her fork but paused before taking a bite. Of course, she murmured. But as Nathan chewed, he couldn't shake the creeping sense that the floor beneath him had shifted, just a fraction, but enough to remind him, uncomfortably, that for once, he might not be holding all the pieces. If you were in Vivian's shoes, would you have done the same, or something even more ruthless? Drop a comment below and tell us what you would have done in her place. And while you're here, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more stories that will leave you speechless. Nathan Ellis leaned back against the supple leather of the booth, swirling the dark red wine in his glass as if the motion could drown out the unease spreading through his chest. Vivian sat opposite him, poised and graceful as ever. Yet something in her eyes remained out of reach, almost cold. It wasn't like her, and for the first time in ages, Nathan found himself studying her, trying to read the meaning beneath her silences. He was used to dictating every tone, every glance, every word. Tonight, though, felt different. She had been almost quiet through each course, her responses measured, her gaze slow and deliberate, like she was silently weighing each of his words on an invisible scale. The whole conversation had felt like a chess match. Every move he made met with an unseen counterplay. It unsettled him more than he cared to admit. The tension hovered in the gentle clink of cutlery, in the hush of whispers that drifted across the soft candlelight of Mirabelle's dining room. Nathan took another swallow of wine and let out a slow breath, deciding that no matter what game Vivian thought she was playing, he would settle it before the night was done. He always did. He always came out on top. And then, just as he set his glass back onto the table, a voice cut clean through the soft murmur of the restaurant. Bright, syrupy, brimming with a confidence that turned his blood to ice. Happy anniversary, sweetheart. Nathan's whole body froze mid-motion. That voice. It couldn't be. His fingers froze around the stem of his glass as he turned his head, movements stiff, unwilling. A pair of piercing eyes met his, eyes alive with taunting amusement, carrying that smug certainty that made his pulse thunder painfully in his ears. Monica Reed, his mistress, clad in a show-stopping crimson silk dress. She stood just a few feet from their secluded table, one hand resting carelessly on her hip, lips curved into a smirk that cut sharper than any blade. She looked exactly as she always did, young, brazen, dangerously sure of herself. Nathan's heartbeat crashed violently against his ribs. No, she wasn't supposed to be here. Across from him, Vivian stayed perfectly still. She didn't so much as flinch. She simply turned her head by a fraction, regarding Monica with calm, icy detachment before her eyes slid back to Nathan. And for one shattering second, he knew exactly how it felt to be prey caught cleanly in a trap he hadn't even known existed. A faint roar filled Nathan's ears. He could feel the weight of the restaurant pressing in. The hushed murmurs, the flicker of curious glances, the taste of iron rising behind his teeth. It was like watching a bomb detonate in slow motion, and he was standing dead center, nowhere to run. Monica let out a small, delighted laugh, clearly basking in the spectacle she just detonated. "Oh, don't pause on my account." She swept her gaze slowly over Nathan, then to Vivian, her voice dripping sweetness and venom all at once. "I was just passing by and thought it would be rude not to say hello." Nathan forced air into his lungs, fighting to rearrange his face into something casual, dismissive, anything but panicked. "Monica," he said smoothly, his tone a practiced mask even as his pulse skidded out of control. "What a surprise." She tilted her head to one side, dark hair cascading over her bare shoulder as she fixed him with a look that glittered with hidden triumph. "Is it?" Nathan's jaw tightened, a small twitch, but one Vivian would never miss. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She only watched him, her fingertips slowly circling the rim of her wine glass, the faintest curl tugging at the corners of her lips, as though this scene had been inevitable all along. Heat crawled up Nathan's neck despite the air conditioning humming gently above. He could feel the back of his shirt dampening under his suit jacket. The sickening realization that there was no plausible line to feed either woman that would fix this. He felt the room tilt around him, the illusion he'd crafted so meticulously, crumbling grain by grain. Monica slid smoothly into the booth beside him, her perfume a potent blend of jasmine and something sharper, something that made his head swim. She laid a hand over his forearm as if she owned the right, her nails dragging lightly over the fabric of his suit sleeve. "I was wondering when you planned to tell your beautiful wife about us," she purred, her voice dripping with mocking pity. "Or were you hoping to keep me your little secret forever?" Nathan exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled, his fingers curling into the table's edge beneath the immaculate linen. Inside his mind, every thought screamed at once. Damage control, excuses, anything to pull this back from the brink. His eyes flicked to Vivian again. She was still as marble, but something hidden in her look turned the pit of his stomach to ice. There was no shock, no outrage, no tears, just curiosity, as if she were observing a scene she'd already envisioned play out 100 times. Nathan felt the first sharp stab of genuine fear. Vivian lifted her wineglass, took a slow, measured sip, then finally spoke. "Well," she said, her voice as smooth as the vintage resting in her hand, "this is certainly unexpected." Monica smirked. "Is it?" Vivian set her glass back down, fingertips brushing the slender stem with delicate ease. "Oh, I don't know," she murmured, her tone like silk. "It almost feels inevitable." Nathan forgot how to breathe. What in God's name was happening? A pressure built behind his ribs, cold and tight, an unfamiliar tremor winding through the foundation he'd always trusted to hold. The walls of Mirabelle, once his fortress of polished charm and quiet intimidation, suddenly felt like thin glass. He saw it then, the tiny, telltale crack in Monica's armor. Her self-assurance flickered like a flame hit by a stray gust of wind. She had come here to break Vivian, to puncture the illusion of the flawless wife with a single, well-timed cut. But Vivian wasn't breaking. She wasn't even flinching. And that was starting to rattle Monica more than she'd anticipated. Caught dead center between them, Nathan could feel the power shifting and had no idea how to seize it back. Monica narrowed her eyes, tilting her head slightly at Vivian. "You're awfully calm for a woman who just found out her husband's been lying to her." Vivian's lips curled into a smile. Not forced, not showy, not the brittle grin of someone pretending to be fine. No, it was small, sharp, and terrifyingly certain. Nathan's pulse slammed against his ribs. Vivian leaned forward, cutting gracefully into her filet mignon, lifting a neat bite to her mouth. She chewed slowly, swallowed, and without breaking eye contact, dabbed her lips with the corner of her napkin. Then, at last, she looked at Monica again and said softly, almost with pity, "Oh, sweetheart, I've known." The words cracked the air like a gunshot. Monica froze. Nathan felt the floor drop out from under his feet. His vision tunneled for a breath, the world around him turning muffled at the edges, as if his own pulse had swallowed the sound. He would have paid anything in that instant to rewind this night, to undo whatever door he'd left unlocked for Vivian to find. Vivian took another sip of wine, watching them both with the easy calm of a queen at court. "Now," she murmured, setting her glass back down, her voice barely louder than a breath, yet somehow louder than the entire dining room, "why don't you tell me exactly what you thought was going to happen tonight?" Monica's mouth opened, then shut again, her poise fracturing in real time. Nathan's breath lodged in his throat, immovable. He was no longer in command. And for the first time in his life, he felt that truth sink in like ice through his veins. Nathan Ellis felt the blood drain from his face, an alien sensation for a man so used to wielding every moment to his favor. He had walked into Mirabelle certain he controlled the story. But now, pinned between his unfazed wife and his shaken mistress, staring at the ghost of a smirk playing at Vivian's lips, he knew he had miscalculated. Badly. Monica shifted beside him, unease creeping through her expression like ink spreading through water. She'd come for fireworks, for tears, for a woman shattered in front of her. Instead, all she found was this unsettling calm. That knowing smirk didn't belong to a woman blindsided by betrayal. "I'm sorry." "What?" Monica finally asked, her voice missing the razor edge it had carried before. Vivian tilted her head a fraction, a small spark of satisfaction flickering in her eyes like she was savoring a puzzle she'd finished long ago. "I said," she repeated, tapping one nail lightly against the rim of her glass, "I've known." Nathan swallowed hard, his mind thrashing for any way to claw back control. But every familiar trick, the easy grin, the neat excuse, the tidy spin, none of it would work here. Not with this. Monica let out a short, nervous laugh, shaking her head. "No, that doesn't make sense." Vivian's eyes flicked to her, then back to Nathan, steady, unbothered, lethal in their calm. "Doesn't it?" Nathan hated her poise then, hated how she still owned every inch of this moment while he sat pinned under the weight of his own unraveling secrets. Monica, scrambling to find footing, crossed her arms and leaned back against the booth cushion, trying to look unfazed. "If you knew, why would you stay?" Vivian smiled, but it was a cold, razor-thin curve that made the wine in Nathan's glass taste like ash in his mouth. "Oh, Monica," she murmured, voice soft as velvet, "you assume I stayed for him." Nathan's fingers twitched, curling tighter against the pristine tablecloth. Vivian lifted her glass, savoring a slow sip before she set it down again with surgical care. "Tell me," she said, her words meant for Monica, though her eyes never left Nathan's. "How exactly did you think this would go tonight?" Monica blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" Vivian made a vague gesture at the tension in the air between them. "You clearly had a plan. You didn't just wander in here by accident and spot us, did you?" She leaned in slightly, her tone dropping to something conspiratorial, intimate, the kind of voice that cracked secrets wide open. "What was your move? You thought I'd cry? Make a scene? Storm out humiliated while you and Nathan polished off the wine?" Monica's lips parted, then closed again, and Nathan saw it. The precise moment Monica realized she had lost her grip. Silence folded around the table, heavy and suffocating. Vivian exhaled softly and turned her attention back to her dinner, as though the entire exchange bored her now. She sliced into her steak, her voice drifting lightly, yet edged in steel. "It's funny," she mused, "how people always think they're the smartest one at the table." Nathan ground his teeth together. Enough. He refused to let this night spiral any further. He leaned toward Vivian, dropping his voice low enough only she could hear. "We're not doing this here." Vivian barely looked up, her tone mild, her focus still on her plate. "Oh, love?" she murmured, not missing a beat. "We already are." Nathan's pulse pounded against his temple. He could feel the hush and stir of other patrons pretending not to eavesdrop, their curious glances sliding across candlelit tables. This wasn't a private collapse anymore. It was a slow-motion train wreck for an audience. He turned stiffly toward Monica, willing his face into a mask of control, though inside, every piece of him was coming undone. "You need to leave," Nathan said under his breath, his tone low but firm, quiet enough not to draw more eyes than they already had. Monica scoffed, tossing her hair back with a humorless laugh. Are you serious right now? She gestured sharply toward Vivian. She just said she's known this whole damn time, and you're acting like I'm the problem? Nathan locked eyes with her, willing her to understand, to get up, to walk out before she did any more damage. Monica let out a sharp, bitter laugh, disbelief dripping from every word. Wow, I knew you were a liar, Nathan, but I didn't realize you were this pathetic. Vivian, thoroughly entertained, lifted her glass and took a slow, unbothered sip. Oh, I like her, she murmured softly, almost to herself. Nathan's jaw tightened painfully. Monica spun her frustration back to Vivian, her voice rising just enough to draw the curious tilt of a few heads nearby. You act like you're so in control, but look at you. You're still sitting right here, aren't you? Vivian tilted her head, the faintest ghost of sympathy flickering in her eyes. And yet, she said, her voice calm, you're the one who walked in here tonight, hoping for something else. You thought you'd win, didn't you? The words hit like a slap. Monica's face tightened, the first crack in her armor, the first glimpse of embarrassment, maybe even regret. She had come here certain of a victory, but instead she had been outmaneuvered before she'd opened her mouth. Nathan, desperate to end this before it twisted into something worse, slipped his wallet from his jacket and pulled out a sleek black card. He slid it across the table to her. Go, he said, voice low but unmistakable. And don't come back. Monica stared at the card, then up at him, her mouth curling in a scornful half-smile. You really think you can just buy me off? She asked. Nathan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Monica laughed once, the sound sharp and brittle. She picked up the card, turned it between her fingers, then flicked her eyes between him and Vivian. You know what's funny? She said quietly. You two deserve each other. She set the card back on the table, untouched. Then, without another word, she slid out of the booth. Her heels clicked like gunshots across the polished floor as she disappeared toward the exit. Nathan exhaled slowly, feeling his heartbeat thunder less violently, telling himself the worst was over. The restaurant's hum returned in small waves, hushed conversation, clinking glasses, the delicate shuffle of plates. For a moment, it almost felt normal again. Vivian reached for her wine, lifted it gracefully, took another measured sip, and set it down. Nathan turned to her, his hands pressing hard into the edge of the table. Are you going to tell me what the hell that was? Vivian smiled, but it never touched her eyes. She tipped her head, her tone a quiet dagger. Oh, Nathan, she murmured. You should be asking yourself that question. Something in her voice crawled beneath his skin like ice water. He stared at her, searching for the answers she clearly wasn't going to hand him. But she'd already turned back to her dinner, cutting another perfect bite of steak, as if nothing had shattered right there between them. Nathan felt it then. A subtle shift in the air between them. Invisible, but irreversible. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Nathan Ellis's grip on his wine glass was steady enough to fool a stranger, but his pulse told a different story entirely. The confrontation had ended, the spectacle fading back into the hum of hushed conversation and the clink of fine cutlery. But the air between him and Vivian was now thick, charged with an unspoken tension that tasted sharper than any insult Monica had thrown his way. Monica was gone, but her barbed words still hissed in his head. Yet the true threat, the one he'd been too arrogant to see, sat calmly across from him, her sapphire eyes glinting with a depth he couldn't read. She had known. How long? How much? How far did her knowledge reach? Vivian reached for her glass again, sipping with leisurely poise as if she were savoring nothing more than a pleasant dinner. If he didn't know better, he might have believed it. But he did know better. Vivian never did anything without reason. The wine tasted like ashes in his mouth now. Beneath his tailored suit, a faint chill gathered at the base of his neck, sweat beading despite the restaurant's soft, ambient cool. He had danced this dance with competitors, rivals, enemies, but never with his own wife. Nathan cleared his throat, shifting slightly in his seat, desperate to reclaim some scrap of control over the conversation, the evening, hell, his entire reality. So, he began, keeping his voice smooth, steady. Are you going to tell me what that was? Vivian lifted an eyebrow, unhurried. That? She echoed, lowering her glass and tilting her head slightly. You know exactly what I mean. Do I? Nathan exhaled through his nose, forcing a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. Vivian. Her expression didn't change. If anything, it softened into something that looked like faint amusement, though he felt the steel beneath it. She leaned in just slightly, resting her chin on the back of her hand. "What exactly would you like me to explain, Nathan?" His fingers drummed lightly on the tablecloth, betraying his unease. "The fact that my mistress just walked in here and tried to humiliate you, and you sat there like you were watching a dull performance. The fact that you weren't surprised, the fact that you said you've known." He leaned forward, voice dropping lower. "If you knew, why didn't you say anything?" Vivian inhaled a deep breath, almost thoughtful, and let it out slowly through her nose, her eyes never leaving his. "And what would you have done if I had?" Nathan paused, caught off guard. "What?" She smiled, small, sharp, lethal in its simplicity. "If I had confronted you the moment I found out, if I had stormed into your office, hurled accusations, demanded answers, what would you have done, Nathan?" His mouth opened. Nothing came out. It closed again. His throat worked around words he couldn't force free. He hated that. Hated this vise tightening around his ribs, this feeling of being 2 moves behind a game he thought he'd invented. Vivian gave the tiniest nod, as if that alone confirmed her point. "You would have lied," she said plainly. "Or worse, you'd have turned it back on me, made me feel unstable, given me just enough truth to calm me down, just enough fake remorse to make me question myself. Isn't that your pattern, Nathan?" Nathan's jaw locked tight. "That's not fair, isn't it?" Vivian lifted her wine glass again, swirling it with infuriating calm, her dominance over the moment total and unchallenged. "You see, I didn't confront you because I wasn't interested in your rehearsed apologies. I wanted facts, not fairy tales." She set her glass down and leaned back, crossing one leg over the other, relaxed, confident, untouchable. "So I gathered them." Nathan felt the blood drain from his face, his hands curled into fists under the tablecloth, out of sight, his mind spiraling wildly through every lie, every hidden piece, every detail she might have found. She couldn't mean that. Vivian's lips curved ever so slightly. "Oh yes." Nathan's stomach cinched tight. This wasn't just about Monica. This wasn't just an affair. She knew something else, something deeper. Vivian reached for her fork, slicing off another small bite of steak, her voice light, almost idle. "Did you know, Nathan, that when you use an offshore account, you really should be very cautious about how you move your money?" Nathan went perfectly still. The ambient hum of the restaurant dulled to a low roar behind the pounding in his head. His mouth felt dry as ash. Vivian lifted her eyes, pinning him in place with that same patient, devastating certainty. "Of course you know that. You're a businessman, a brilliant one even. But the thing about brilliance—" She tilted her head, the barest flicker of amusement in her eyes. "It often breeds arrogance. And arrogance, as you know, is exactly how people get caught." He couldn't breathe. He sat motionless, hands flat on the linen, his expression carefully neutral, while inside, dread clawed at his ribs. She didn't just know about Monica. She knew about the accounts. Vivian took another small bite, chewing slowly, savoring the moment as if nothing at all was burning to ashes between them. "I'm sure you were very careful," she murmured, voice lilting. "You had the right people in place, the proper layers, the neat, plausible deniability." She tapped her nail against the rim of her glass, the sound infuriatingly soft. "But the thing about secrets, Nathan, is they only stay buried if no one's digging." Her eyes met his, unflinching. "And I was digging." Nathan's pulse roared in his ears. When he spoke, his voice rasped lower than he meant it to. "How?" Vivian's smile was slow and cutting. "Wouldn't you like to know?" Nathan's mind spun violently. This was no longer a petty skirmish over infidelity. This was a full-blown war. She had been watching him, tracking him, while he'd been blind, foolish enough to believe she'd remain docile and trusting forever. That was the lie that had just destroyed him. Vivian lifted her glass, took a patient sip, then set it down with surgical precision. "Don't look so tense, darling," she said softly. "I'm not going to spoil dinner with details." Nathan forced a smile that felt like cracking glass. He needed to salvage something. Anything. "Then what do you want, Vivian?" She held his gaze, her eyes glimmering with something he couldn't quite name. She let out a faint exhale, tilting her head, her tone almost playful. "To enjoy my meal," she said lightly. "And to give you time to think." Nathan's hands curled so tightly around the table's edge that his knuckles ached white under the linen. "Think about what?" he asked, voice measured with desperate calm. Vivian's expression darkened, the softness gone, replaced by something sharper, something merciless. "About what comes next," she said simply. Nathan felt something unfamiliar uncoil in his chest, something disturbingly close to fear. Because for the first time in his life he didn't know what came next. And somehow, Vivian already did. Nathan Ellis had always believed in control. Control over his business, control over his image, control over everyone in his orbit. It was what had made him a legend, what had transformed him from a hungry young dealmaker into a name whispered with both envy and fear in Manhattan's most exclusive rooms. He'd built an empire on strategy and secrecy, bending circumstances and people to his will. And it had never failed him. Until now. Sitting across from Vivian in the soft, intimate glow of Mirabelle's private booth, Nathan felt something he hadn't tasted in years. Uncertainty. It wrapped tight around his ribs, settled like poison at the back of his throat, making the fine wine he'd just swallowed taste sour. His wife had just spoken the most dangerous words she could ever let slip. Not only had she known about Monica, she'd been watching him, tracking him, investigating him. And that meant his meticulously hidden offshore accounts were no longer invisible. The weight of that realization pressed between his shoulder blades, suffocating. He wanted to speak, to wrestle back control, to spin this into something he could contain. But for the first time in his life, he had no clue what move to make. Vivian, meanwhile, looked perfectly at ease, as if they were idly chatting about tomorrow's weather. She lifted her napkin, dabbing the corner of her mouth with patient grace. She was enjoying this. The knowledge sent a ripple of near panic through his chest. She'd waited for this moment, prepared for it. While he'd been blind, Nathan leaned forward, forcing his voice to stay low and calm. "I don't know what you think you've found, but you're making a mistake, Vivian." She lifted one eyebrow, lazy, amused. "Am I?" His jaw locked. "You don't understand what you're playing with." Her lips curved into something sharper than a smile, something unflinching and lethal. "No, love. You're the one who doesn't seem to understand," she murmured. "I understand perfectly." A fresh wave of cold coiled in his gut. Vivian lifted her glass again, savoring another sip like she had all the time in the world. Then, without glancing at him, she slipped a hand into her designer clutch, pulled out a slim, unmarked envelope, and laid it gently in the space between their plates. Nathan stared at it. The soft, ambient clink of nearby tables faded to a dull echo in his head. He reached for it slowly, carefully, his fingertips brushing the smooth flap before he dragged it closer. He paused for a single shallow breath, then lifted the flap and drew out the papers inside. His vision tunneled. He forced every muscle in his face to stay still. The neat stack in his hands laid out everything: detailed wire transfers, Shell Corporation charters, offshore deposit records, a flawless, damning trail that ripped every secret from his shadows. Proof of everything he had worked so ruthlessly to bury. His entire financial empire, exposed in cold, undeniable black and white. Nathan flipped through the pages, each line a nail in the coffin he'd built himself. His heart slammed against his ribs. His throat turned to dust. His mind shrieked at him to find an exit. Any exit. But there was none. This was checkmate. Vivian watched him, head tilted slightly, studying him like he was some intriguing specimen under glass. When he finally managed to speak, his voice was tighter than he meant, and he hated that she could hear it. Vivian let out a soft sigh, shaking her head in mocking disappointment. "Oh, Nathan, did you really think you were the only one who knew how to play this game?" He ground his teeth, forcing himself to breathe, to focus, to claw back a shred of control. "You have no idea what you've done." She lifted her wine glass, swirling the deep red liquid lazily, calm as ever. "I think I do." Nathan's fingers tightened into fists around the damning pages, the weight of them pressing into his bones. "What do you want, Vivian?" She leaned forward slightly, and for the first time that night, the teasing edge vanished. Her expression turned cold. "Final. I already took care of it." The words slammed into him like a punch to the chest. His lungs seized, his vision narrowed. One savage thought cut through the fog. No, she couldn't. "What do you mean?" he rasped. Vivian gave him a long, deliberate look. one that told him clear as day it was already far too late. "I mean," she said softly, voice sharp as a blade, "that by now those accounts don't belong to you anymore." Nathan's entire body tensed, rigid with disbelief. She couldn't. She wouldn't. Panic clawed at the walls of his chest. His mind scrambled through passwords, offshore aliases, hidden trust funds, all of it slipping through his fingers like sand. His mouth felt dry as bone. Vivian tilted her head, watching him with unsettling calm, as if she could see each frantic calculation behind his eyes. "You always did love the illusion of power," she murmured. "The feeling of being untouchable. But darling, you forgot the one truth that matters. Power isn't about what you own. It's about what you can take away." Nathan's chest burned under the weight of her words. This couldn't be happening. It couldn't be real. His thoughts raced, clashing, hunting for an undo button, a reversal, anything to claw back what she'd stolen. But as he stared at the woman he'd underestimated for so long, he felt something chilling settle in his bones. He had always believed there was no lock he couldn't pick, no trap he couldn't slip, until tonight. And tonight, she'd proven him wrong in front of no one and everyone, all at once. He had lost long before he even realized there was a game. Vivian exhaled quietly, pushing back her chair. She picked up her clutch, rising with that same unbothered elegance that now tasted to him like poison. "I'd love to stay and watch you process this," she said lightly, as if they were exchanging pleasantries. "But I think I'll leave you to enjoy your dinner." Nathan's hands clamped around the edge of the table, knuckles bone white. "Vivian?" His voice came out low, coiled, dangerous. She smiled, small, maddeningly patient. "I'll see you at home, darling." And then, without another word, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor, her movements graceful, unstoppable, final. Nathan sat there, the damning documents trembling in his hands, the taste of defeat turning bitter on his tongue. And for the first time in his life, he understood something truly terrifying. He wasn't the predator. He was the prey now. Nathan sat frozen in the dim glow of Mirabelle's private booth. The weight of the documents in his hands heavier than any billion-dollar deal he'd ever signed. His mind spun wildly, choking on the truth of what had just happened. Vivian hadn't just humiliated him in front of his mistress. She'd gutted him to the bone, stripping away not just his pride in this glittering room, but the very foundation of his wealth, the empire that had built the legend of Nathan Ellis. And she'd done it so cleanly he hadn't even noticed until it was far too late. Shock still numbed his tongue, but rage was beginning to seep through the cracks. His fingers curled hard around the damning pages, his jaw flexed painfully tight. He had to fix this. He would fix this. This wasn't over. It couldn't be over. He was Nathan Ellis, and men like him didn't lose. But the evidence trembled in his grip, undeniable in its precision, so perfectly laid out that only a fool could pretend otherwise. She had been planning this for months, maybe longer, stalking every move he'd made while he'd drunk his own Kool-Aid about being untouchable. The faint click of a glass set down snapped him back. His head jerked up, and only then did he register that Monica was still there, perched at the edge of the booth, staring at him with wide, rattled eyes. Unlike Vivian, who had left with the world in the palm of her hand, Monica looked shaken, lost. "Well," she said finally, her voice thin as she broke the thick silence. "That did not go the way I pictured." Nathan let out a sharp exhale, raking a hand through his hair. He wanted to unleash the roiling fury inside him at her, to blame her for showing up, for kicking down a door she had no right to open. But deep down, he knew this wasn't her doing. Not really. Vivian had already beaten him before Monica ever strutted through Mirabelle's entrance. Monica leaned closer, her voice dropping low, her eyes searching his face for something. An explanation. Maybe a sliver of reassurance that she hadn't just backed the wrong man. "What the hell just happened, Nathan?" Nathan dragged in a breath, tamping down the tremor in it, forcing himself to sound steady, even as the ground beneath him felt like quicksand. "You just watched my wife," he said hoarsely, "destroy me." The words tasted like ash. Monica's brow creased as she darted a glance at the papers clenched in his fists. "I don't get it. What is all that?" Nathan let out a hollow laugh, a sound stripped of any real amusement. "It's everything." Monica's expression darkened at that, not with pity, but with a bitter flicker of envy and defeat. She had wanted to ruin Vivian tonight, to rip away the prim, perfect wife mask and take her place. But instead, she'd watched Vivian walk out untouchable, stronger than ever, and she hated it. Monica shifted restlessly in her seat, the uncomfortable truth settling heavy between them. Her fingers drummed nervously against the edge of the table. "She played you, Nathan." Nathan lifted his eyes to hers, his expression carved from stone. "You think I don't know that?" Monica swallowed, leaning in a fraction closer. "What are you going to do?" Nathan didn't answer right away. A beat, too long, stretched between them. For the first time in his life, he was staring down an opponent he hadn't prepared for. He had always assumed Vivian was content, docile, uninterested in playing his game. It had never once crossed his mind that she might have been playing an entirely different one all along. A hot rush of shame rose up behind his ribs, threatening to crack the mask he'd worn so easily for years. This wasn't a hostile boardroom or a cunning rival. This was his wife, and she'd played him like no one else ever had. Monica narrowed her eyes, studying him like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. "You don't have a plan," she said flatly. Nathan exhaled sharply, the truth of it scraping raw inside him. He hated the taste of it. Monica pressed her lips into a hard line, then gave a short, bitter laugh. "Unbelievable. I should have known." His shoulders stiffened. "What's that supposed to mean?" Monica scoffed, sitting back in her seat, arms crossing tightly over her chest, her nails dug into her own skin like she needed something to bite down on. "You think I didn't have my doubts about this? You think I didn't wonder if your wife was really as clueless as you always said?" She let out a shaky breath, her eyes flashing with frustration. "But no, you kept saying she wouldn't suspect a thing, that she was too busy being your pretty little perfect wife. And I believed you." Nathan's jaw flexed. She was playing the perfect wife. Monica shot him a cutting look. "No, Nathan, she was playing you." His fingers twitched against the damning stack of paper in his grip, the pages crumpling at the corners. Anger sparked under his skin, hotter than the humiliation, sharper than the shock. For a breath, he wanted to slam his fist through the table, to break something, anything, just to drown out that sharp, mocking echo in his mind. She won. But all he could do was sit there and let the rage chew holes through his pride. Monica shook her head again, her voice low, almost amazed. "God, she really flipped this whole thing on you." Nathan's nostrils flared. He tried to hold on to something, anything, that might let him claw this back, but reality hammered against his ribs harder than he could fight it. Vivian hadn't just taken his money, she'd taken his power, gutted it, right in front of the very people who once whispered his name with respect. And now Monica saw him for what he was, cornered, defeated. She watched him, expectant, waiting for that last-minute magic, that legendary Nathan Ellis pivot that would turn this all back in his favor. But there wasn't one. Monica sighed, pushing her hair out of her face with a shaky hand. "So that's it? You're just going to sit here and let her walk away with everything?" Nathan's jaw locked so tight it hurt. No, he wasn't. But he needed time. He needed to think. He needed to figure out exactly where he'd misstepped, and how to rip this back before it was too late. A bitter taste filled his mouth as he realized there were no clean moves left, only damage control and desperate hope. Monica scoffed, a brittle sound echoing between them. "You know, I actually thought this was going to be the start of something real." Nathan frowned, eyes narrowing at her. "What are you talking about?" Monica exhaled, looking away for a heartbeat before snapping her gaze back to his. "I wasn't planning to be your dirty little secret forever, Nathan. I thought, once you got rid of her, we could actually be something, out in the open." Nathan's stomach twisted at that. He'd never promised her that. Not once. Monica let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "But now? Now I see exactly what this was." "I was just a distraction for you," Monica snapped, her tone sharp with a bitterness she didn't bother to hide. "A way to keep yourself entertained while she was setting you up to fail." She shook her head slowly, her eyes cutting through him with a mix of pity and contempt. "You're not as clever as you think you are, Nathan." His fingers twitched, his whole body rigid with the weight of her words. Monica stood abruptly, smoothing down her dress with jerky hands. "Good luck fixing this," she said acidly. "Because something tells me Vivian didn't just walk away tonight. She's already 5 steps ahead of you. And with that, she spun on her heel and left him sitting there alone, a king dethroned in the middle of his own battlefield. Nathan clenched his jaw so hard it ached, his mind a hurricane of rage and humiliation. Vivian had humiliated him, cut him down more skillfully than anyone had ever dared. But this wasn't the end. It couldn't be. Because if there was one thing Nathan Ellis knew how to do, it was claw his way back from the edge. And he sure as hell wasn't going to let Vivian be the one who finally buried him. Nathan Ellis sat motionless in the back seat of his black town car, his fingers clamped around the leather so tightly his knuckles burned. Outside, the city lights smeared past the tinted windows in bright, mocking streaks. But he barely registered them. His thoughts chased themselves in circles, replaying every second of the night, every moment he should have seen, every mistake that had brought him here. Vivian had outflanked him at every turn, stripped him of everything he'd built and done it all with the calm precision of a surgeon. His phone vibrated in his pocket. The sudden buzz snapped him from the spiral. He yanked it out, half expecting to see a message from one of his lawyers, or maybe an urgent notification from his bank telling him this was salvageable. But the name on the screen made his pulse jump. Jack Sullivan. Nathan hesitated for the briefest moment before answering. Jack had been more than an advisor. He'd been Nathan's quiet right hand for years. The man who knew where the bodies were buried and how to keep them there. If anyone could help him spin this back under control, it was Jack. He pressed the phone to his ear. "Tell me you have good news." Jack's breath hissed through the line. "I don't know what the hell is happening, Nathan, but you need to get in front of this. Fast." Nathan's stomach tightened into a hard, aching knot. "What are you talking about?" There was a pause on the line, the kind that felt like a warning siren in the silence. Finally, Jack's voice came back, low and tense. "There's chatter. Your name is floating around in circles it shouldn't be. Government chatter, Nathan. The feds. People are whispering about offshore accounts, wire fraud, tax evasion." Nathan's grip on the phone squeezed so tight his fingers ached. No, she wouldn't. His voice cut colder than he meant, but a sliver of dread wormed under it, undeniable. Would she? Jack's laugh came through the line, humorless, sharp. "You really want to bet on that? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like she's already gutted you financially. If she decides to twist the knife a little deeper, you won't be fighting for your fortune. You'll be fighting to stay out of a prison cell." Nathan felt the blood drain from his face. Prison. The word thundered through his skull like a gunshot. He'd built his empire methodically, layered every risky deal with enough plausible deniability to stay untouchable, made sure every offshore account was insulated, invisible behind walls of paper. But Vivian had the keys. She had the documents. She'd done what no one else had ever dared, cracked the armor he thought was impenetrable. A sick heat climbed his throat. The seat beneath him might as well have been made of ice. The city lights beyond the tinted window blurred, meaningless against the rising roar in his ears. His fingers dug hard into his temple, forcing himself to think through the panic. "What do I do?" Jack didn't answer right away. When he did, his tone was clipped, urgent. "You need to move faster than she does. Get to your lawyers. Lock down what you can, now, before she hands the rest over." Nathan nodded reflexively. Even though Jack couldn't see him, his mind was already racing, calculating the next counterplay. "I'll handle it." He ended the call before Jack could say anything else. He stared out the tinted window at the glittering Manhattan skyline, towers of steel and glass that had once felt like they belonged to him. Now, for the first time, they looked fragile. The car eased to a stop in front of his building, a sleek, modern high-rise that had symbolized his power for over a decade. He stepped out into the warm lobby lights like a man stepping onto a stage he no longer controlled. Each polished tile reflected back a version of him he didn't quite trust anymore. The doorman greeted him with a polite nod, but Nathan barely acknowledged it, moving swiftly through the lobby and into the waiting elevator. His pulse thundered in his ears. As soon as the doors closed, he exhaled shakily, bracing both palms against the cool metal walls. His reflection stared back at him, polished, commanding, but he could see it now. The cracks. The elevator glided upward in silence. The moment the doors slid open to his penthouse, he knew. Something was wrong. Vivian was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan glittering behind her. A glass of red wine rested in her hand. She'd changed out of her evening gown into tailored silk pants and a crisp blouse, deceptively casual, but there was nothing casual about the way she looked at him. Like she'd already won. Nathan stepped inside, his pulse pounding so hard he could taste it. "You've made your point, Vivian?" She tilted her head slightly, taking an unhurried sip of wine. "Have I?" His fists balled tight at his sides. "You've taken my accounts, my money. That's enough." Vivian let out a quiet hum, setting her glass down on the sleek marble countertop. "Was it?" Something in her tone iced through his veins. Then his phone vibrated again. He glanced down, expecting another call from Jack. But what flashed across the screen turned his breath to stone. Breaking news. Ellis Holdings faces federal investigation for financial misconduct. His entire body went rigid. Across the room, Vivian picked up her phone, tapped her screen with serene precision, and tossed it onto the couch without so much as flinching. "It's already everywhere, Nathan. Your name, your accounts, every shady transfer you thought no one would ever see. I told you, you were arrogant. And now the entire world knows it too." Nathan's vision darkened at the edges. "No," he murmured, shaking his head hard. "No, you don't understand what you've done." Vivian lifted an eyebrow, calm as ever. "Oh, I understand perfectly." He took a step toward her, chest rising and falling with fury he could barely keep contained. "You think this is just about money? You think you've won because you drained my accounts?" His voice dropped, low and lethal. "You have no idea what comes next." Vivian didn't flinch. She didn't so much as blink. She simply reached into her pocket and pulled out another slim envelope. Nathan stared at it, his breath ragged. "I've already filed for divorce," she said, her tone smooth, steady, untouched by the storm raging a foot away. Before he could snarl out a threat, she stepped forward, pressing the envelope firmly to his chest. "And before you start throwing around your usual threats, let's be clear about something," she went on, her voice razor-sharp. "Every asset we ever shared, already transferred. Every loophole you could have twisted to squeeze me in court, already locked. The lawyers have been working on this for months." She smiled then, a smile with no warmth, only the edge of victory. "And those secret offshore accounts you thought were untouchable? Already seized." Nathan's heartbeat roared like an avalanche in his ears. Vivian leaned in, her voice soft enough that only he could hear it, which made every syllable cut deeper. "You always thought you were playing the long game, Nathan." She paused, eyes gleaming with cold, merciless triumph. "But you forgot one thing." He swallowed hard, words stuck in his throat. Vivian's smile widened just a fraction, wicked and calm. "I was playing it longer." Nathan's breathing turned shallow, the world narrowing to a tunnel of noise and flashing headlines. Vivian turned her back to him, lifting her glass again and gazing out at the sprawling city skyline, as if she hadn't just dismantled the man behind her, piece by piece. Nathan stumbled back a step, mind blank, body frozen. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just losing, he was already lost. Nathan stood alone in his penthouse, the walls pressing in from every side. The breaking news alert on his phone kept pulsing like a death knell. Ellis Holdings, federal probe into fraud and corruption. His name, once a symbol of ruthless success, now dragged through every headline, synonymous with scandal. His empire, the monument he'd sacrificed everything to build, was disintegrating in real time. Offshore accounts seized, company in the crosshairs of federal prosecutors. And Vivian, calm, flawless Vivian, had orchestrated every move like a grandmaster. She hadn't just ruined him, she had spent years planning how to end him. The thought twisted Nathan's gut into a hard, sick knot. Had he really been so blind? Vivian stood near the massive window, her face unreadable, a ghost outlined by the glittering city lights. The same city that had once bowed to his will, now turning its back on him. She swirled the wine in her glass, taking her time, perfectly aware that she held every ounce of power left in this room. Behind his ribs, a bitter thrum of disbelief and fury coiled tighter with every tick of silence between them. He wanted to roar at her, to break this glass palace she'd built out of his secrets. But the weight in his chest was too heavy to move. Nathan clenched his jaw, forcing himself to shove past the raw shock, past the suffocating panic, past the brutal taste of failure thick on his tongue. He was not a man who went down without a fight. He had clawed his way up from nothing, outwitted more enemies than he could remember, owned every room he walked into. This would not be the end. When he spoke, his voice was low, lethal. "You did all this? Just for revenge?" Vivian turned her head slightly, one brow arching in mild amusement at the simplicity of the question. "Revenge?" She took a sip of her wine, exhaled softly, then shook her head. "No, Nathan, this wasn't about revenge." Nathan let out a sharp, humorless laugh, bitter as bile. "Oh, right. Justice. You call this justice?" He gestured violently toward the divorce papers she'd pressed to his chest, the headline still flashing on his phone, the empire she had gutted from the inside out. Vivian set her glass down with delicate precision, then turned to face him fully. For the first time that night, fire burned bright in her eyes. "Do you know what the difference between us has always been?" she asked, her tone calm but edged with something that sliced straight through him. Nathan said nothing, so she stepped closer, closing the space between them like a closing trap. "You destroy people because it entertains you, because power to you has always been a game." Her words struck hard, her voice unwavering. "You take, you manipulate, you push people into corners, and you never once pause to think about the consequences." Each word lodged under his skin like a barb. His breath hitched in his throat, but he forced his face to remain carved in stone. He wouldn't let her see how deep she was cutting. Nathan scoffed, rolling his eyes with a bitter sneer. "Spare me the morality lecture, Vivian. You knew exactly who I was when you married me." Her lips twitched, but the shape that formed wasn't a smile. It was something darker. "Oh, I did. But did you ever stop to wonder why I married you?" The question slammed into him like a bullet. For the first time, he realized he didn't have an answer. Vivian exhaled softly, shaking her head in quiet pity. "You thought it was because of your money, because of your charm, because, like everyone else, I was just one more moth to your flame, dazzled by your world of wealth and power." She let out a small laugh, soft but edged with something that sent a chill down his spine. "You were so sure of your own importance, so certain I was just another pawn in your game. You never thought to ask why I stayed." Nathan's pulse thundered in his ears. Vivian stepped even closer, her voice dropping to a razor's whisper. "I stayed, Nathan?" Vivian's voice was steady, unhurried. "Because I was watching." He swallowed hard, his throat suddenly bone dry. She went on, each word an unflinching cut. "I watched you build your empire, watched you lie, cheat, and manipulate your way into boardrooms. I watched you steal companies right out from under men who trusted you. Watched you bury secrets so deep under layers of legal paper that you actually started to believe no one would ever find them." Her gaze darkened, cutting through him. "But most importantly, I watched what you did to my family." Nathan froze. The air in the penthouse shifted, heavy, suffocating. Each word sank into him like an anchor dragging him under. Vivian tilted her head, eyes narrowing in a way that made him feel laid bare. "Oh, you don't remember." His mind spun backward, clawing through a decade of ruthless deals, hostile takeovers, the wreckage left behind. Her sigh cut through the silence, sharp with disdain. "Of course you don't. You've destroyed so many lives, it all blurs together, doesn't it?" Then she said the name, Henry Lancaster. It landed like a bullet to his chest. The world tilted, a company acquisition, a hostile takeover, a proud man who'd spent his life building something only to have Nathan Ellis snatch it away, ruin it, because he could, because it pleased him to win. Vivian watched the horror dawn on his face. Her lips curved into a slow, razor-edged smile. "Ah, there it is." Nathan stumbled back a step, as if distance could lighten the weight of the truth crashing down on him. Her father, Henry Lancaster's daughter, the woman he'd let so close, trusted so deeply, believed so fully, had never really been his. She had been the storm waiting for the perfect moment to destroy him. "You married me, to destroy me," he rasped, his voice a ghost of itself. Vivian's smile didn't waver, didn't soften. "No, Nathan, I married you to undo what you did, to take back what you stole, to make sure you never did it to anyone else again." His mind reeled. This wasn't a petty betrayal. This wasn't an affair or a lover's grudge. This was a reckoning years in the making, forged long before she ever said "I do." Nathan staggered back, grabbing the edge of the table for balance as the brutal reality of her plan pinned him in place. Vivian stepped forward, closing the distance one last time. Her voice dipped to a lethal whisper. "I hope you enjoyed your game, Nathan." She breathed the words like a benediction. "Because this time, you were the one being played." And with that, she lifted her glass, took a slow, unbothered sip, and turned away, leaving him to drown in the wreckage he'd built with his own hands. Nathan's mind splintered with ragged thoughts, fragments of excuses and failed calculations swirling like debris in a storm. His body locked rigid, pulse pounding against his ribs like a war drum. He had spent years convincing himself he was untouchable, that no rival, no competitor, no one, not even his wife, could ever tear him from the throne he'd carved for himself. He had built it with his own hands, every deal, every hostile takeover, every calculated lie. And yet here he was, standing in the wreckage of his empire, while she quietly toasted to his downfall. Vivian still held her wine glass, the deep red liquid swirling lazily as she watched him. The look in her eyes wasn't cruel or vindictive. It was calm, settled, the gaze of someone who had already stepped beyond the past, while he was still reeling, trying to comprehend that it had all fallen apart. "To new beginnings," she murmured, the words floating between them like a soft, final blade. Nathan's throat felt scraped raw. His muscles locked tight, as if his body refused to believe what his mind already knew. He wanted to fight, to rage, to tear apart these walls, to prove he could still claw this back, that Nathan Ellis never lost. But there were no moves left to make. She had seen to that. Vivian took a sip of her wine, unhurried, deliberate. The air between them vibrated with everything they'd never said. The woman he'd once thought of as decoration, a quiet adornment to the life he controlled, had dismantled him from the inside out. He'd never seen her coming. His fingers twitched at his sides. He forced a breath through his lungs, grasping for any shred of composure, any edge, but his mind wouldn't settle. The evidence was airtight, the accounts stripped bare, the company unraveling under federal eyes. The same legal teams that used to jump at his command were now picking apart the knots he'd tied so skillfully. And Vivian, the woman he'd so arrogantly underestimated, had orchestrated every last piece of it. The thought alone scraped through his bones. He exhaled through his nose, jaw rigid. "You really think this is over?" Vivian arched an eyebrow, set her glass down with a gentle clink, and turned to face him fully, calm, unwavering. "It is over, Nathan." His pulse spiked, anger burning through the fog, reaching for anything to hold on to. "You think you can just walk away? That I'll stand here and do nothing while you tear down everything I built?" His voice dropped low, sharp, threatening. But even as the words formed, they tasted hollow. Vivian didn't so much as flinch. She met his threat with a steady look, exactly as he knew she would. "Destroy?" she repeated softly, head tilting slightly. "I didn't destroy anything, Nathan. You did that yourself." Vivian's voice was quiet, unshaken. "I just made sure the world saw it." Nathan's fingers curled into white-knuckled fists. His empire had been forged through precision, every risk calculated, every outcome premeditated, every angle covered. But Vivian had never been a variable in his math. He'd never once believed she could outmaneuver him, let alone dismantle him. Now he was the one searching the room for an escape route he knew didn't exist. A ragged breath forced its way from his chest. His eyes flicked toward the scattered documents on the coffee table, page after page detailing his ruin, undeniable proof that the power he'd spent his life collecting had been stripped from him piece by piece. His lawyers couldn't bury this. His money couldn't buy it away. The government was circling already, sharks scenting blood. And the one person who might once have shielded him had made certain he had nowhere left to run. She'd played the long game. He'd never stood a chance. Silence stretched between them, heavy, suffocating. Vivian waited. Her expression gave him nothing. Nathan forced a smirk, a pathetic, desperate mask meant to pretend he still had teeth to bare. "You think you're any different from me?" he asked, his voice calm despite the storm breaking him apart inside. "You think this was all for some noble crusade? You're just as ruthless as I am." Something flickered behind Vivian's eyes, not anger, not guilt, something colder. "I never claimed to be noble, Nathan," she said simply. The smirk slipped from his mouth before he could hold it. "I did what needed to be done," she went on, her tone even, merciless. "And the difference between us? I'm not the one drowning." Nathan's chest tightened painfully. Her words hit him like a steel blade driven straight through his ribs. Vivian exhaled softly and lifted her wine glass once more, her fingers delicate around the fragile stem. You built this empire believing you were untouchable, that you could take and never answer for it. But power doesn't work that way, Nathan. She swirled the wine, watching the liquid catch the light before letting her gaze pin him in place one last time. It never lasts forever. Nathan's hands trembled. His entire body felt stretched thin, a wire ready to snap under its own tension. His mind raced frantically for any card left to play, any hidden blade. But there was nothing. Vivian raised her glass a final inch, a slow, knowing smile curling at the corners of her mouth. "So here's to your legacy," she murmured. "May it rest in peace." Nathan's vision blurred at the edges. Rage, humiliation, and something darker. Something like fear. Burned through him like acid. Vivian took her last sip, savoring it as if he were no longer even worth her attention. She set the empty glass down with a soft, final clink against the marble counter. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, disappearing down the hallway, her footsteps fading until the only thing left was silence. And Nathan stood there alone in the ruins of everything he'd ever built. Nathan's breath came shallow and strained, his mind spinning as the crushing weight of everything finally landed in full. For the first time in his life, he had lost. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he could ever claw his way back. He sat in the dim hush of his penthouse, elbows braced on his knees, fingers pressing hard against his temples as though he could squeeze out the noise. But the silence only grew thicker, wrapping around him like a steel cage he couldn't break. His empire gone, his power stripped away, his money seized before he'd even had a chance to put up a fight. Outside, the city carried on, oblivious. The skyline blinked like it always had, the soft hum of traffic drifting up through the glass walls, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. A bitter taste pooled at the back of his tongue, the familiar luxury of this place suddenly mocking him. Every polished surface, every expensive piece of art now looked like it belonged to a stranger, one who no longer existed. His phone vibrated on the table, the sudden buzz tearing through the suffocating stillness. He ignored it at first, clinging to the quiet like a last defense, but it kept pulsing, insistent, merciless. Another headline, another betrayal, another nail in the coffin of what used to be Nathan Ellis. With a sharp breath, he snatched it up. His pulse jumped when he saw the name, Jack Sullivan. He hesitated, then answered, his voice raw, scraped thin. "Tell me something I want to hear, Jack." A long, weary sigh filled the other end of the line. "I've got nothing, Nathan. It's bad. Really bad." Nathan closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose until it hurt. "How bad?" Jack's tone dropped lower, careful, almost apologetic. "The feds are deep in it now. The accounts are frozen. SEC's on your neck, and the company's stock is tanking. Hard. Investors are pulling out faster than we can plug the leaks. Whatever Vivian handed over, it was more than enough to light this fuse." Nathan's grip locked around the phone, knuckles white. "There has to be a way to stop this." "There isn't." Jack's blunt tone cracked like a whip, "and you know it." The words hit him harder than any punch. A flash of rage flared up, white-hot and helpless, before fizzling out as quickly as it sparked. A sharp exhale rattled through Nathan's chest. Frustration boiled just beneath the suffocating dread. He had always found a way out. Always. Scandals, legal threats, whispers behind closed doors. He'd danced through them all and landed clean. But this wasn't just a scandal. It wasn't a setback. This was annihilation. His company was crumbling in real time, faster than he could calculate. His name, once spoken with a mix of fear and envy, now plastered across every breaking news banner, dissected by analysts like scavengers tearing at a carcass. "How much time do I have before they come for me?" he asked, his voice flat now, all edges, no warmth. Jack's silence stretched before he answered, soft but merciless. "Days at best, maybe less." Nathan exhaled, slow and jagged. It was over. He'd known it the moment Vivian slid that envelope across the table. But hearing it from Jack, hearing it in the voice of a man who had watched other giants crumble, made it more real than ever. "She really took everything," Nathan muttered to no one but himself. Jack's pause on the line said more than words. "Yeah, she did." Nathan let his head fall back against the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling high above him. The weight pressing into his chest wasn't just fury anymore. It was something deeper, older, something he hadn't let himself feel in years. Regret, helplessness, loss. Whatever it was, he hated it. "Do I have anything left?" he asked at last, his voice hoarse. Jack was silent for a long moment before letting out a quiet sigh. "A couple of assets, small ones. They haven't touched them yet, but they will. The houses, the cars, the overseas accounts, all frozen or flagged. And after today's headlines, nobody's gonna risk being in your corner, Nathan. Your name's toxic now." Nathan's jaw clenched, a muscle ticking in his cheek. "So that's it," he said flatly. "I'm just supposed to sit here and watch everything I built get torn apart." Jack's tone sharpened, losing its usual deference. "You don't have a choice. Vivian made sure of that." At the sound of her name, Vivian, his wife, his destroyer, something inside Nathan twisted painfully tight. Jack exhaled into the line. "I'll keep digging, but you'd better start preparing for the worst. I'll call if I find anything." The call ended with a dull final beep, leaving Nathan alone in a silence that pressed in from every corner. His phone screen dimmed. Notifications stacked up behind it, news alerts, panicked emails from investors, frantic messages from people who used to line up to shake his hand, but were now sprinting to wash his name off their reputation. He tossed the phone onto the coffee table with a sharp clatter. Leaning forward, he buried his face in his hands, elbows digging into his knees. Vivian hadn't just stripped him bare. She'd left him standing. That was the part that stung like acid. She'd made sure he'd still be here to watch every brick of his empire crumble. Slow enough that he felt every fracture in his bones. A shaky breath slipped from his chest, his mind looping around the same impossible question. What now? Every instinct in him howled to fight, to twist, manipulate, claw up through the ruins and build something new from the ashes. But with what? She'd cut off every resource before he'd even realized he was bleeding. His eyes lifted, scanning the vast penthouse. It felt bigger now, emptier. Once, this place had been a testament to his reach, his power. Now it was nothing but a gilded cage. He thought back to the look in Vivian's eyes before she turned and walked away. No hatred, no gloating, just cold, absolute certainty, the kind of certainty you wore only when you knew the war was over before it even began. He exhaled sharply, pushing himself up from the couch. He crossed the silent penthouse to the bar and poured himself a drink. His hands steady, his insides anything but. The glass felt cold against his fingertips. The deep amber liquid swirled lazily as he lifted it to his lips. The first sip burned. The second didn't. His reflection stared back at him from the vast wall of glass, but he barely recognized the man looking back. He wasn't Nathan Ellis, the untouchable mogul, anymore. He was just another fallen king. The truth lodged deep in his bones, cold, merciless. For years he'd played the game, believing he'd owned it, convinced no one could ever corner him. And yet, the woman he had trusted enough to share his bed had been the one to gut him clean. The echo of her voice threaded through the silence now, sharper than the liquor on his tongue. Power never lasts forever. He hated how true it sounded in her mouth, more truth than all the excuses he'd used to quiet the people he'd ruined. A dry, bitter chuckle scraped his throat. Vivian had been right about one thing: power never lasts forever. Nathan sank back onto the couch, the skyline stretching endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. What used to be a crown at his feet now felt like a distant foreign kingdom. A world that no longer cared he'd once ruled it. His empire lay in ruins. His name was poison. And the silence filling the room pressed in on him like a closing fist. His phone sat face down on the table next to him, buzzing now and then with notifications he didn't bother to check. He already knew what they'd say. More losses, more knives in the back, more proof that the world spun just fine without him. He had built an empire on the belief that he was invincible. He'd lied, manipulated, outmaneuvered every rival foolish enough to stand in his way. He had made gods out of his secrets and worshipped the idea that no one would ever tear him down. But he wasn't invincible. And Vivian had proved it. The thought crawled under his skin like ice. It hadn't been a rival or an enemy who unmade him. It was the woman who knew exactly where to cut the deepest, and did so without a flinch. Nathan leaned forward, elbows braced on his knees, his hands raking through his hair. A sharp exhale cut the stillness. He had spent these last days watching it all bleed away, piece by piece, powerless to stop it. His lawyers scrambled to slow the wreckage, but the proof was too damning, too perfectly laid out. The offshore accounts were gone. The board had turned its back. The authorities were circling. His reputation, once a currency more valuable than any check, lay in pieces. Once people had groveled for his approval, hung on his words, maneuvered to bask in his shadow. Now they were disappearing, rewriting history to erase him from their stories. Investors withdrew. Old allies jumped ship. Even his biggest admirers now whispered his name as a warning, a moral to a cautionary tale. He had become a lesson. Nathan reached for the half-empty glass of scotch, rolling the liquid in slow circles before taking a measured sip. The heat slid down his throat, familiar, but it didn't comfort him. Nothing did. He stared at the reflection of the city in his glass, the towers burning bright against the dark sky. For years, he had looked down at this city and believed he owned it. Now, he was just another man looking up at a world that no longer cared who he was. A sharp buzz snapped him out of the fog. Nathan's eyes flicked to the phone on the table. Vivian. He hadn't heard from her since that night. Since she walked out without a backward glance, leaving him buried alive under the ruin she'd made of him. His fingers hovered over the screen, hesitation catching in his chest. Then her message flashed across the locked screen. Check the news. A cold knot tightened in his gut. Before he could second-guess himself, his thumb unlocked the phone, opening the news app on autopilot. The top headline punched the air from his lungs. Vivian Lancaster acquires Ellis Holdings in unprecedented takeover. For a moment, he just stared, unblinking, unbreathing, as if sheer disbelief could change the words on the screen. She hadn't just broken him. She had taken everything. His eyes flicked across the article in jagged, frantic jumps, his heart pounding in his throat. The takeover had been rapid, the legal signatures airtight. Too perfect, too precise. Which meant she hadn't improvised this. She'd planned it from the start. His company, the empire he'd built from nothing, brick by bloody brick, sacrificing anyone and anything to keep it standing, was hers now. The realization carved into his bones like ice. This had never been about revenge. This was a scalpel. He'd always assumed that once she ruined him, she'd vanish, satisfied to watch him rot alone. But he'd underestimated her again. She hadn't just wanted his money. She wanted his legacy. And she had it. His jaw locked so tight it hurt. His grip around the phone dug lines into his palm. In his mind, he could still hear her voice, calm, measured, deadly, the night she slid that envelope across the table. You always thought you were playing the long game, Nathan. But you forgot one thing. I was playing it longer. He squeezed his eyes shut, exhaling a breath that rattled his chest. He had spent his whole life ensuring no one could ever get close enough to betray him, to break him. He'd kept the world at arm's length and believed it made him untouchable. And yet the woman he'd let closest, the woman he'd once dismissed as an ornament to his kingdom, had ripped that kingdom from beneath his feet. His chest constricted painfully as headline after headline scrolled across his screen, each one a fresh grave for his name. Vivian Lancaster reshapes industry after Ellis collapse, from scorned wife to powerhouse mogul. The woman who took down Nathan Ellis. That last one burned the deepest, because every word was true. He set the phone down with numbed fingers, eyes fixed on the empty glass before him. She hadn't destroyed him out of spite. She'd done it because she could. And the world adored her for it. A dry, humorless laugh clawed out of his throat, more a ghost of breath than a sound. For years, he defined power as control over people, over deals, over fate itself. But Vivian had taken that control, turned it on him, and gutted him with it. She'd spent years waiting, watching, studying every move, and when the moment came, she'd made her play. And she had won. The last swallow of scotch burned a trail down his throat, but it did nothing to blunt the jagged truth lodged in his chest. This wasn't just the fall of an empire. It was the erasure of him. Nathan Ellis was no longer a man to be feared, no longer a king among mortals. He was a cautionary footnote in Vivian Lancaster's triumph, and that was the cruelest punishment of all. So the story is over, and our wonderful friends, are you still here with me at this hour? If you're still watching, then maybe something about this tale has stirred something deep inside you too. Tonight wasn't just about a man losing his empire or a wife exacting revenge. It was about a truth we often forget, that power built on secrets is always borrowed, and it can be taken back the moment someone braver, wiser, or more patient decides enough is enough. Nathan Ellis thought he could buy loyalty, hide betrayal behind luxury, and bury mistakes under wealth. But Vivian reminded us all that no lie stays hidden forever, and no crown sits secure if your kingdom is built on deceit. In the end, she didn't just break a man. She broke the illusion that we can hurt others without consequence. As the poet Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." Maybe tonight you feel a wound too. A betrayal, a loss, a mistake you wish you could take back. But perhaps that pain is also where your light begins. We are not defined by how high we build our walls, but by what we choose to stand for when they fall. So if this story moved you, even a little, promise me something. Carry its lesson into your own life. Remember that real power is not what you own, but what you give, protect, and live honestly. And if you ever find yourself broken, remember, healing is stronger than pretending. If you're still here, please like this video, share it with someone who needs this reminder, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that dare to dig deeper. Thank you for being here, for feeling this with me. I can't wait to see you again in the next story. Good night, and take care of your own kingdom.